It's the battle Donald Trump didn't know he was in, and his opponent is Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader in the UK. They've been having their annual conference in Bournemouth, and just to highlight that that's his message, Ed Davey did his speech in front of a big picture of Donald Trump, Elon Musk and Nigel Farage. What is the strategy here and what does it mean for British politics? We'll discuss on the latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's the end of the Lib Dems annual conference in Bournemouth, which means we're going to have a classic Chris Mason recording this episode of Newscast as they're taking down the conference, and he gets on a train or a plane or a taxi, or maybe he's just walking.
Hello, Adam. So I'm staring at a whole line of blue rectangular boxes full of wire after wire after wire. And there's this kind of dance, this choreography of cables that goes from here, Bournemouth on the south coast, to Liverpool for the Labour conference starting at the weekend. We're in the main kind of hall of the conference centre in Bournemouth. There is a white van that has reversed through this giant gap in the wall of this hall in order to take all said wires a couple hundred miles away up the motorway as, another conference ends and then another one begins in a few days.
Well, let's turn back time to a few hours ago on Tuesday, before the Lib Dem conference had ended, and Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, was giving his speech. That's what we'll focus on in the first half of this episode of Newscast. And then we're going to catch up with Jeremy Bowen, who's been reporting on Gaza in a new edition of Panorama. But that's what you'll hear on this edition of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Chris, surrounded by wires in Bournemouth.
So, Chris, just give us a flavour of what's been going on at Lib Dem conference the last couple of weeks. Last couple of days. It's always quite, what's the word I would use for the Lib Dems? Vibrant. Like they like to have a good time.
Yeah, they do like to have a good time, and they feel that they've got a good reason to have a good time in terms of their prospects recently, that huge advance they made at the general election a year ago, the advances they've made in council elections in recent years, but they're also very alive to how politics seems to be changing and changing fast at the moment, and that is code for the rise of Reform UK, and they've expressed a frustration at the squeeze in attention that Reform's rise has arguably contributed to, but they are absolutely not remotely ashamed about leaning into talking about Nigel Farage the whole time. There was 30 plus references from Ed Davey to Nigel Farage in his speech, and they spot an opportunity. They think that Labour and the Conservatives are often clustering around Reform, chasing Reform's arguments as they would see it, and they think there's space therefore in the political argument where they can, as a big party, be distinctive compared with those other three rivals, and that's the thrust, I think, of where they've been in the last couple of days. But they acknowledge privately, Adam, from a year ago where it was sort of non-stop party at the Lib Dem conference because it was just after their general election result, which was stonking for them. The landscape since then has changed completely, and they hadn't anticipated that, and they and the other parties are now having to react to that, and that's going to be the theme, I think, of this conference season across the piece, the ones we've already had and the ones that are still to come.
And what are the Lib Dems actually offering other than just sort of positioning and being different?
It is primarily positioning because they say at this stage in the cycle, next general election a long way off, that they're not focusing too much on specific policies. In positioning terms, I think they are trying to attach a pride in and a real leaning into a kind of understated patriotism. There's loads of echoes, to be momentarily nerdy, there's loads of echoes with the kind of language that Sir John Major used to use 30 years ago to describe what he saw as the essence of Britishness and Englishness. You might remember his language around cricket greens and warm beer, and I think it was maids on bicycles from what I can recall.
Cycling to church.
And that was it. Yeah, that was it. And just stepped outside the conference centre, by the way, so it might be a bit of a sense of reversing vans. A beautiful sea view, actually, looking out over the English Channel. And Ed Davey's really leaning into that. And he's doing that absolutely explicitly and intentionally because he thinks there are one nation Conservatives, what he would see as moderate Conservatives, who are still backing the Conservatives, or at least were at the last general election, who he thinks are ripe for conversion towards the Liberal Democrat cause. So he's really leaning in on that and trying to seize what he sees as an opportunity of the declining popularity of Labour in government, alongside no improvement, even a backwards slide for the Conservatives in terms of their popularity since the election, to try and harvest some, as they see it, sort of lost voters who are looking out for a home.
And in terms of kind of policy offerings from Ed Davey today, it was things like, he reiterated their clampdown on social media for young people, which has been in the papers and on the news over the weekend. Also a big push to lure, this was an intriguing one, sort of cancer researchers from America who feel disillusioned by the Trump attitude to science and funding of cancer research, to basically turn the UK into a cancer-fighting superpower.
Yeah, so that was a sort of specific example, if you like, of a policy idea hooked to the broad theme of this speech from Ed Davey, which was taking a look at America under Donald Trump and suggesting that is what the UK could feel and look like were Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister. And then he had that specific idea, as you say, of pointing to, as he saw it, cancer specialists in America whose funding may have been reduced or lost since the return of Donald Trump to the White House, and suggesting that the UK should be a home for them. They should be welcomed here to continue their work to the benefit of the UK. What else did he say in policy terms? He repeated what he has said recently, describing the situation in Gaza as amounting to a genocide. He repeated his arguments about wanting a much closer relationship with the European Union, but there was intentionally, I think, a lack of those kind of specifics, conscious of where we are in the kind of electoral cycle, and keeping it quite broad and positiony rather than a whole list of new kind of specific policy details.
And I suppose the Lib Dems have this thing of, in recent years, they were accused of being too ambitious and suggesting in the Brexit years that Joe Swinson, the then leader, could become Prime Minister, or being accused of being too tactical and just sort of holding their cards close to their chest about which other party they would support to form a government in a hung parliament. So I suppose they're constantly trying to balance those two things.
Yeah, they are really. They're sort of shimmying around all of that. I mean, I thought it was striking. I mean, obviously, we're a long, long way from the next general election, but I thought it was striking.
It doesn't feel like it some days, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. It really, really doesn't. It really doesn't. So it's almost just worth emphasising that, really. So Ed Davey did say explicitly when he was talking to Matt Chorley on 5 Live during this conference that, he did want to be in government again. He was then a lot more delicate in what he might commit to about hypotheticals down the road and working with other parties. He wouldn't work with Reform, which is no surprise, but he didn't rule out working with Labour, which I guess is one potential arithmetic outcome over the next general election. Could there be a situation where the Liberal Democrats and Labour, who broadly are competitive in different parts of the UK, could assemble a number that would amount to a majority? There'd be plenty of Liberal Democrats who are deeply, deeply sceptical of a coalition again, given that it was devastating to their numbers in Parliament in 2015 after their 5 years with the Conservatives. But there were all sorts of different flavours and assemblies of parties working together in government. And Ed Davey, I think, enjoyed his time as a cabinet minister and wielding power, and it's clearly keen to and willing to say publicly that he would do that again. As I say, I'm conscious in all of those chats though that in all likelihood is a long way off, just because we're only a year and a bit on from the last general election.
Chris, I can picture you walking down that hill from the conference centre, and I think I can actually hear you walking down that hill. I can see it in my mind's eye.
This is exactly where I am. It's the very spot where many, many years ago, I think I'm right in saying, a load of us, I think it was 2006, chased Boris Johnson, who was then a shadow minister, who had said something in response to Jamie Oliver's campaign about turkey Twizzlers. And it ended up being this rolling media scrum half the way down the seafront. Anyway, there you go.
We will raid the archives and try and
unless
find
I'm
that,
confusing
yes.
one seaside resort with another, which is entirely possible.
Don't worry, Chris, we will raid the archives and fact-check that claim you just made. Right, Chris, safe travels and see you in the Newscast studio soon.
Ta-ra. Speak to you soon.
And before I spoke to Chris, I caught up with the Lib Dem deputy leader and Treasury spokesperson Daisy Cooper to pick up some of the themes Chris and I were just mulling over there. Daisy Cooper, hello.
Hi.
Hello. You can have a very easy question for free to start with. What's the atmosphere like at Lib Dem conference this year?
It is a fantastic feeling here. Look, I think we are feeling positive, we're feeling proud, we're feeling patriotic, but I think we've also got a real sense of responsibility in terms of the job ahead. I think we've just heard from Ed Davey in his main speech, and he basically had a really fundamental question to ask, which is kind of what kind of country do we want to be, what kind of country do we want to live in? And our message is really clear. We don't want, Trump's America to become Nigel Farage's Britain.
And anyone watching Ed Davey's speech on the news could not have failed to miss you in a classic Daisy pink trouser suit.
Well, I do like my trouser suits. They're comfy, they're smart, and they are brightly coloured. I'm only 5'4", right? So, I've got to wear a bright colour for anyone to see me.
So you mentioned the P word, patriotic, and I've noticed everyone is using that now to describe themselves. How would you describe what patriotism is?
I think someone who's patriotic is somebody who loves their country, and we see that in stark contrast to somebody who might be a nationalist, who we think is someone who will hate their neighbour. I think most ordinary, maybe the silent majority in this country, sort of regular, decent people are sort of proud of Britain. We like Britain. We like quite a lot of the stuff that we have here, whether it's buckets and spades, fish and chips, or a little bit of drizzle, and we know there are problems in the country, very deep-rooted problems. We as a party are committed to coming up with a vision for fixing all of those issues. But fundamentally, I think if you're a patriot, you love your country, but you don't have to hate your neighbour. You don't have to stoke up divisive politics and drive wedges between families, communities, or the country.
So Nigel Farage, for example, you would say is not a patriot because even though he loves his country, he's anti-European.
But this isn't about politics, whether you're pro or anti-Europe. That's what it is. That's not what this is about. It's not about a political position. It's about whether you love your country. And the fact that Nigel Farage went over to America and was effectively calling for sanctions, calling on the American government to put sanctions on the UK, was saying that, that we're sort of like North Korea in terms of free speech. I mean, these are outrageous things to say about the UK. I personally don't think that those are the kind of things that a patriot would be saying.
Okay, now talking of Nigel Farage, Ed Davey mentioned him quite a lot in his speech. I think it was something like 31 mentions in about 55 minutes. But yet you have a go at the BBC for covering Nigel Farage too much.
Well, look, I think the thing about Nigel Farage is that he thrives off divisive politics, right? He says divisive things. And what
so do
we are
you.
worried about
You
is
said
that
he's
we
not
think
patriotic.
Well, look, we think that sometimes broadcasters who have a responsibility to provide fair and impartial information to the British public at large should challenge Nigel Farage a little bit more. We're very grateful to come on your programme and all the different programmes on the BBC so that we have a platform to tell the British public what we believe and what we stand for. But we do think that all politicians should be held to account. And sometimes it does just feel like we don't get as big as a platform. And when we do, we might get a harder time then and get asked more questions than Nigel Farage does. And I think it's really important that at a time when people are really sick to the back teeth of the Conservatives, they're getting really fed up with the Labour Party and mistake after mistake after mistake. They're looking for alternatives, but I think people really need to be informed, including by broadcasters, about what the alternatives are. And so what we're trying to say is, well, look at what Nigel Farage actually stands for. He says he wants to reintroduce fracking into our countryside. He said he wants to have private health insurance in this country, something that's been a disaster in the States. We have a different alternative. We're proud, we're patriotic, we have a positive vision for Britain. We want to protect our NHS, protect our environment, and that's a very different kind of vision for the future of our country.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the plans that Ed Davey put forward today and that you and your front bench colleagues have been doing in Bournemouth over the last couple of days. Lots of headlines for the idea of health warnings on social media. What would they actually be? Where would they appear?
It's a great question. So first of all, just to say, Our science and technology spokesperson, Victoria Collins, has been going out and about to all sorts of different places to talk to young people themselves about how they feel about social media. And what we've heard loud and clear is young people themselves are crying out for help. They know that these apps are really, really addictive, and they're finding it hard to break that kind of addictive behaviour. So we do think there should be health warnings on there that says if you continue to scroll, there should be a sort of a limit on doom scrolling. There should be a stop on people seeing the repeat content time and time again. And there should be a health warning that says if you continue to spend lots of time, on these apps, then then it can lead to this kind of addiction and can lead to isolation, and maybe encourage people to take a break from time to time. I think we'd need to work with the industry and with experts to work out precisely what those warnings would say, precisely how they would appear. I don't think it's for politicians to legislate down to the exact wording that we would use, but I do think the principle of public health warnings on this very addictive technology is actually I hope, a really helpful and important suggestion.
I just wonder, though, if you in your own phone and social media and technology use might be like lots of people, and just like things like that pop up and you just sort of swipe it away without even thinking about it because you're just so used to it popping up. Let's be realistic.
Well, look, who knows, right?
What do you do when one of those cookies pops up?
How we could do it.
What do you do when one of those cookies pops up?
Well, it depends. On the BBC, I just say accept all, but on other websites, I may not. But I mean, it depends which kind of country or health information I'm looking at. But look, fundamentally, there is an issue here. We want to say it's not the fault of young people for the fact that they're on social media. These apps are deliberately being designed in a way which is making them addictive and creating an addictive behaviour. And young people want to break that. They just don't know how. And I think having a conversation about how we use public health warnings, which have been incredibly helpful, whether that's on cigarettes or whether it's on alcohol or gambling or whatever it might be, public health information warnings are generally recognised as a very successful public health intervention. And I think it's important that we treat that kind of addictive nature of tech in a public health way.
Talking of social media, Ed Davey got lots of headlines over the weekend where he said that Elon Musk should be arrested. Why would he be arrested? What would the laws be there that the police might think he's broken?
So I think what we're very worried about is that on X these days, there's been some paedophilic images, there's been some really, really worrying content, and what we understand is that content that is being published on X is the kind of stuff that you wouldn't be allowed to look at sort of in the real world, as it were, in the offline world as well. And so we would like there to be an investigation to see whether or not he could be held criminally liable for allowing that kind of content to be on his platform.
And would that be under the Online Safety Act, or are we talking about different laws there?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have to say I haven't looked into the detail of this, but as I understand it, there are particular crimes about the kind of images that somebody might hold, and it would be those particular laws that would apply. Oh,
so basically like making child abuse images like paedophiles get convicted of? Potentially. But anyway, as you said, you're not a legal expert.
Potentially.
Yeah, I won't put you on. You're not the Lib Dem legal department.
I'm afraid I'm not.
Yeah, one of the other policies Ed Davey talked about was a massive boost for green energy that would halve our energy bills in the next decade. I mean, people are saying Ed Miliband's plan is already very, very ambitious. How are you going to go even further?
Well, look, we are really clear as a political party that taking climate action and driving down the cost of living has to go hand in hand. And so what Ed has outlined is a plan, to, as you say, to halve these energy bills in the next decade. And one component of doing that is breaking this link between gas and electricity prices. We know that renewables are the energy source of the future. Renewables are far cheaper. They are far cleaner than using oil and gas. But because of the way we do the pricing structures, people don't get any benefit in their, in their bank balance effectively for using renewables or signing up for renewable schemes. So delinking the price of those two things means, first of all, that it would continue to drive people towards using renewable energy. And secondly, when people are using renewables, they can see in their bank balance, they can see on their bills that they're actually getting a saving.
And would you take off some of the so-called policy costs on our energy bills? So things that are added on, not because of the cost of the gas or electricity, but because of things the government has put there?
Well, look, what's quite interesting actually is that yesterday at Liberal Democrat conference we had a whole day called our Business Day, where we had representatives from the major business trade bodies and a number of entrepreneurs and business owners come and talk to us about their ideas. And one of the suggestions that was put to me yesterday, it's not party policy, but one of the suggestions that was put to me was, rather than scrapping these levies, just moving these levies from one part of the sector to another, because some of these levies don't actually exist on oil and gas. So there's lots of ideas around about how we can actually reduce the cost of renewable energy whilst making sure that we are raising money through these levies to continue to invest in the expansion of renewables more broadly.
Okay, right, Daisy, you've got lots of other interviews to do, I think, so I'm going to let you go. But before you do, Laura and Paddy at the weekend on Newscast were talking about what anthems parties should have at their conferences. What would the Lib Dem anthem be?
I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this. So I did my rally speech on Saturday night, and the last slide of my speech was there was no limit on our ambition, and I wanted the song No Limit from the 90s, and it got vetoed.
Oh, really? Why?
Apparently it's just a bit naff.
I disagree.
I think it's a great song. I think it's a banger. I love it.
And I know everyone jokes about Lib Dem Glee Club night, which I should explain to people who've never been to Lib Dem conferences. Yeah. A big sing-along where you have lots of original songs and then lots of songs where the lyrics have been adapted to make them more Lib Dem-y. Are there any new tunes in the songbook this year?
There are new tunes every single year, but I didn't make it to Glee Club. I'm afraid I was doing some very serious dinners with all sorts of business groups that had come down to our conference, so I didn't make it this year. But I don't think I'll even dare peek into the songbook.
Okay. Always hard at work. Thank you very much, Daisy. And now we're going to catch up with our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, because he's been making an episode of Panorama, which you can watch on iPlayer now, called Gaza, Dying for Food, which focuses on this new model for delivering aid in Gaza called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's been criticised for the fact that Palestinians can only go to a certain number of points to pick up aid, and also quite a lot of people have been killed in the process of queuing for it. So here's the conversation I had earlier on with Jeremy. You've been very busy the last couple of weeks.
I've been very busy.
I mean, you're busy all the time, but
I'm a busy man because, if you're international editor of the BBC, there's a lot to internationally edit, basically. But my main thing, really, I spent 3 weeks based in Jerusalem in July, August, and then basically ever since then I've been working with a really impressive team of colleagues, a big team actually from Panorama and from BBCI. You needed a big team to get it all together in quite a short period to put this Panorama BBCI film together.
We'll talk about that in a second, but I just wanted to get kind of your initial thoughts about what's happening with the growing number of countries recognising a Palestinian state. And yesterday's newscast, James Landale did a great job of just actually explaining the practicalities of what changes with the British government position and what doesn't change. But I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, I think the Gaza war has acted as a catalyst and stripped away a lot of the ambiguities and the cover that people had for not dealing with the big issues. The big issues are now really apparent, and there's a divide, there's a bifurcation between essentially Israel's story, which is, as Netanyahu put it, I think, yesterday, when he said there will be one state west of the River Jordan, and that's going to be Israel, brackets the Jewish state. And there's the other point of view, which Britain has, which France has, which many countries have, which is there needs to be two states, Palestine alongside Israel, and it's not going to happen overnight, but that has to be the direction of travel. So when I say it stripped away ambiguities and the capacity to pretend, what I mean is that since the collapse of the really serious attempt to try to get the two-state solution, which was the Oslo peace process in the 90s, a lot of countries, Britain included, have continued to say, yeah, we'd love to have a two-state solution, it's the only future, without doing anything about it, while watching Israel taking land, building settlements, putting facts on the ground, which were intentionally and openly designed to stop a two-state solution ever happening. So the phrase two-state solution, I would say, became an empty slogan. And on the other side of things, Israel was also able to be ambiguous because, they would say things like, well, yeah, of course, it would be great, wouldn't it? But, we need security, and the occupation's only really a temporary measure. That's all out the window now. the occupation, which the International Court of Justice said last year was illegal, they clearly have decided it's permanent. And they decided that a long time ago, but they found ways of not saying it. It's all being said now. We know where we are. The big question is, where does this go, and what do Britain, France, and the others do to try to make this more real than it is right now?
Yeah, and what are the options? What can they do?
Well, there are a number.
Or actually, do you just stop here, actually? Keir Starmer may feel he's sort of done enough now.
I don't think he'll be able to do that because, first of all, he'll get pressure from inside the Labour Party to do more. Because, as we know, that pressure. Also, cabinet members. You look at Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who almost lost his seat because of the way that enough voters in his country, in his
Constituency.
Because of the way enough voters in his constituency were unhappy about Labour's position on Gaza. And he was openly saying before they said it, yeah, we've got to recognise it. So I don't think he can stop there. And you note the way that the new Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is doubling down on Britain's criticism of Israel. Very interesting. They've changed their names on the maps on their website to Palestine. They had all that ready. That was a plan. Very interesting. But I know from a fact from diplomatic sources that another list of options has been prepared. It includes things like, if they want to get punitive, if, for example, Israel was to annex the West Bank as a response to this, things they could do, which they've talked about, include, for example, ending visa-free travel for the 700,000 plus Jewish settlers in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem.
Right.
That's one.
So not letting them come to the UK
without a visa, because now you just turn up without a visa and get in.
Yeah.
Doing things like sanctioning products from the West Bank, maybe more broadly sanctioning Israel. Those surveillance flights over Gaza, notionally to help spot where the hostages might be, are still going on. Plenty of people, including people on the British side, believe they're actually being used for targeting the data. And the MOD denies that, I think. But how on earth can you decide how they're going to use the data? And as well as that, there is a partial arms embargo, but there is a huge exemption right in the middle of it for the products that Britain makes for the F-35 attack fighter aircraft. And they're looking at ways, I think, to say, well, how can we do this and remove that exemption? I'm not saying that they're going to do any of these things, but these are the kinds of options that are being discussed.
There is a ratchet available. Right, let's talk about your side hustle then. This episode of Panorama, available now on iPlayer. So it's looking at the...
And for the next year.
And for the... Good to know, so we can watch it in 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no, watch it now and watch it again.
It's the beauty of on demand, much like a podcast, in fact.
Indeed.
Which is what you're on right now. Looking at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was this replacement for the UN organised and delivered aid programme in Gaza. You and I have talked about the news reports about it. Why did you want to look at it in more detail?
Well, we had to find a way of looking at the catastrophic hunger crisis. The IPC, which is the world's leading body for assessing whether famine exists in food emergencies, are saying that the famine is getting worse, and they've actually given a warning, which is the ending of the program, the Panorama program, which is to say that if Israel goes ahead with the Gaza City offensive, it said in August, then that famine is going to get much worse. Now, Israel has gone ahead with that. It's going to get worse because of huge pressure on supplies, because of the forced movement of up to 1 million civilians who are already in a weakened condition, many of them suffering from famine already, starvation, hunger. People are dying from hunger in Gaza at the moment. So it was important to talk about that. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which the UN says is not at all humanitarian, it's militarized, started in May. Israel, supported by the US, had the plan to replace the UN system. They haven't really managed to do that in the way they want because the GHF is so ludicrously inefficient. But Israel has said consistently that under the UN, they allowed Hamas effectively to help themselves to food, the UN supplies. The UN denies that. They say that their consignments are barcoded and traceable. And they say, more importantly, that Israel has never come up with any evidence for these alleged thefts. And indeed, one of the people we spoke to, David Satterfield, who was the Biden administration's humanitarian envoy to Gaza, a veteran American diplomat, he also said they didn't give him evidence either of that. They're just saying it. And it's actually become, a lethal and catastrophic disaster. A senior diplomat, Western diplomat, said to me, we knew GHF was going to be bad. We didn't think it would be quite this disastrous. Reliable figures say that more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed near their sites. GHF, by the way, denies anyone has. They haven't heard of anyone being killed around their sites.
And Jeremy, you also spoke to some whistleblowers for this, including a soldier from the IDF, from the Israeli military. What did they say?
Well, what this guy was saying was that he said that he had a good commander, and their commander made sure they didn't shoot anyone. And I've no reason to disbelieve him, because he said, look, that was by luck. Because the way the system works there, he said, because what they do essentially, what he says, they use live ammunition as crowd control. And you can see it. We found videos, and we geolocated where they were, and the stories all stacked up, which show crowds of people crushed together with the bullets kicking up very close to them in the sand. And that's because, he said, this whistleblower explained, we called him Michael, it wasn't his real name. We disguised their appearance. They were just silhouettes. And plus we used actors' voices because they don't want to be identified. And he said, look, we have two imaginary lines, and they don't tell the Palestinians about the imaginary lines. They're imaginary, and only they know where they are. He said they pass one line, we fire warning shots. If they don't realize that then that's a no-go zone, the instructions are they pass the second imaginary line, we use lethal force to stop them. I mean, they have drones with loudspeakers on them that speak Arabic. They could have a drone saying, go back.
So what we think of as crowd control, which is like barriers or those tapes you get at airports or people saying step back, is in the IDF's case around these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food points is firing
heavy machine guns.
Firing machine guns that could kill people.
Not just do kill people. We gave the Israelis a right of reply. We asked the Israeli ambassador here in London to speak. That was declined, and they passed us on. The embassy passed us on to the IDF. We asked for an interview. The IDF declined to give us an interview. They gave us some written statements, which we quote from extensively. And on this particular subject, they say, the IDF, they say, we do not deliberately kill innocent civilians. I think the choice of words is interesting. Deliberately and innocent. How do you define those words in the heat of battle and in a place where so many civilians have been killed? More than 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the health ministry in Gaza, run by Hamas, but its figures are generally regarded as not just reliable, but quite likely an underestimate. More than 65,000, that's including 18,000 plus children, and most of that 65,000 plus are civilians. So when that many people are being killed, you wonder just how the IDF defines innocent civilians.
And you also spoke to somebody who works more closely with the GHF itself.
Yeah, we spoke to somebody who spent a period over the summer as a truck driver delivering pallets of food to these aid sites. He went to all of them. He said the worst one was the one in the center of Gaza because it's the only one which isn't. It abuts an area which is where Palestinian civilians are, and the other one in the south, that's in an area which is in. They've kicked all the civilians out. They've knocked all the houses down, in the Rafah area, where it used to be a bustling big city. I remember it very well. There's nothing there now apparently except rubble and no civilians, and so the other sites are down there, so they're not quite as heated up. But he said every time he went, there was gunfire. There was very little fire coming back, just on one occasion, he said. What else did he say? He said that you could see them firing towards the crowd. he was so shocked by what he saw that he took videos secretly. They weren't supposed to. Now, we again have geolocated them. Our experts on these things on the team looked into the data which is embedded in video. When you do a video on your phone, it doesn't just say the time.
Yeah, the
It says
metadata.
the metadata
Yeah.
is where you were, and I don't think it quite tells you exactly where your mood at the time, but it tells you many things. And we're able to detect all of this. So again, all his stories all stacked up. We combined it with other videos coming from that exact time. And so we have videos on the days that he's talking about of people sheltering and being shot at. And also an hour and a half or so, 2 hours later, from the local hospital, just the most gory scenes of, which we don't show all the gore, but we show some of it in the local hospital. And I've spoken in the course of, well, not just researching on this film, but over the last few months since GHF started, a whole lot of doctors who've been out there, most of whom have been speaking on background because they want to be able to go back, and they're worried about being banned from the place by the Israelis. And they say that the pattern was clear. They would hear gunfire coming from a GHF site, and they would know that in maybe an hour and a half, 2.5 hours, there'd be a mass casualty incident, because even though they were quite close to the sites, it was very hard to extract casualties. It was dangerous and difficult. People were trying to get food. So it would take, sometimes people would carry. One doctor said to me, this isn't in the film, I reported it a few months ago, that people would turn up with dead and dying people on their backs who they've been running and carrying for maybe an hour. And he said, and it is absolutely heartrending to tell someone who comes in with his brother on his back that the man's dead.
And you mentioned that in response, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation denies that anyone has died in the vicinity or as a result of using their facilities. What other stuff did they tell you?
Well, they said that they are a humanitarian organization. As you know, the UN disputes that. They said that they, both they and the IDF say that they're learning. The IDF says that they've learned from reports of fatalities. They say we don't know about these numbers. In fact, they say the numbers are an exaggeration. There's a lot of evidence that they're not. The IDF say that they've learned from what's been happening, and they've issued new instructions to their troops. But the evidence seems to be that there are still, these terrible scenes going on at these sites, not quite as bad as they were at the peak of it, because more food is in Gaza. But what's happening now is that there is a huge wave of people going down from Gaza City, driven out by the Israeli offensive. 1 million people in Gaza City, more or less. The Israelis are trying to get all of them out to go to a tiny area, about 15% of the total area of the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip, in terms of its square mileage, if you like, is about the same size as the Isle of Wight. So think 2 million people in an area 16% of the Isle of Wight.
Just while we've been talking, and it's been totally fascinating, I've just had one eye on Donald Trump because he's speaking at the UN General Assembly.
What's the latest?
Well, I wouldn't ambush you and say react to this instantly, but what I would say from what I have seen is it's a classic Trump international speech. He starts complaining about the escalators at the UN building and the fact that his teleprompter, which is the American word for autocue, isn't working for his speech. Then he rattles through his 7 wars he claims that he's solved. He's very critical of countries recognizing a Palestinian state, where we started off.
Yes.
And very critical of what he calls open borders. So basically the level of immigration in Europe.
In Europe. Oh, yeah, because...
And he says that the people in London want Sharia law.
Well, I think we know that a lot of that is just a load of rubbish. It's just not true. And I think, people say that, well, it's the way that the President of the United States talks, but I think it's very important that a man as powerful as the President of the United States, when he says that London's turning into effectively an Islamic emirate, I mean, that's not true. In fact, it's a lie. It's not true. I live in London. I would have noticed. I've been to...
And if anyone would notice that, it would be you. Your experience around the world.
Quite a few years reporting the ISIS story in Syria and Iraq, so, I mean, there is a counter-argument to the argument that is made that recognition of a Palestinian state is a reward for terrorism. It ignores the fact that there was a conflict there already, and that one of the great drivers of the conflict that goes back more than 100 years, and that one of the big drivers of the conflict since 1967 has been the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Gaza was still officially occupied, even though the Israelis pulled their people out. I'm talking legally speaking, and in the view of the British government, consistent Labour and Tory governments. So the counter-argument to this is a reward for terrorism, which is made by Israel, made by the US, made by Trump, made by the leader of the opposition in this country, is that actually the thing that puts Israel in danger is the occupation. And that if they had the two-state solution, then there wouldn't be appalling attacks like the 7th of October. Now, of course, they say that's absolutely wrong because Hamas wouldn't be put off by any of that. But of course we don't.
And of course, Starmer says Hamas would have to renounce any idea of being part of a Palestinian government.
The many Palestinians say that too, and also all the Arab states say that. So that position is there. If diplomatically the Israelis and the Americans want to take advantage of it, at this point they don't seem to want to. No.
Jeremy, thanks for letting us take advantage of you today.
Always a pleasure.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. If you would like to listen to episodes of Newscast as they're available every single day, they can be downloaded from BBC Sounds. Bye-bye.